My father told me, if you don't start dating him, I'll cut you out of the family. He works for his father. I love someone else. Now I have neither family nor support. I never thought my life would become one of those dramatic movies where parents try to control their adult children's love lives. But here I am, sitting in my tiny studio apartment at 2 a.m., wondering how everything went so wrong so fast. 3 months ago, I was living what I thought was a pretty normal life for a 24-year-old. I had my own place, a job I didn't hate, and I was head over heels in love with this amazing guy I'd been seeing for 8 months. We met at a coffee shop where he was reading this obscure philosophy book, and I couldn't help but make a joke about how pretentious it looked. He laughed, bought me a latte, and we ended up talking until they kicked us out at closing time. My boyfriend is everything I never knew I wanted. He's kind in ways that catch me off guard, like how he always remembers which subway platform confuses me, or how he'll text me pictures of dogs he sees on his walks because he knows they make me smile. He's studying to be a teacher, which means he's basically broke, but watching him light up when he talks about helping kids learn makes my heart do this weird fluttery thing I used to think only existed in romance novels. The problem started when my dad got promoted at work. He's been with this company for 15 years, working his way up from some entry-level position to something that actually pays decent money. For the first time in my life, my parents weren't stressed about bills every month. Dad was so proud. He kept showing me his new business cards and talking about how he finally felt respected at work. Then came the company barbecue. Dad insisted I come as his guest, said he wanted to show me off to his colleagues. I wore this flowy sundress that made me feel confident, did my makeup nice, the whole thing. The boss's house was ridiculous, one of those places with a circular driveway and pillars that serve no architectural purpose. Everything was perfectly manicured, from the hedge sculptures to the woman who answered the door with a smile so practiced it looked painful. The boss introduced me to his son within the first 10 minutes. This guy was fine, I guess. Tall, expensive haircut, the kind of confident that comes from never having to worry about money. He immediately started talking about his car, then his job at some finance company, then his car again. I smiled politely and tried to steer the conversation toward literally anything else, but he seemed genuinely confused when I mentioned I'd rather talk about books or travel or what makes people laugh. After that barbecue, Dad started bringing him up constantly. How successful he was for his age, how well educated, how his family had connections that could help our family. I brushed it off as typical parent stuff. You know how they get excited when they meet someone they think is impressive. But then the suggestions started getting more pointed. Dad would mention how the boss had said his son thought I was beautiful. How he'd asked for my number. How disappointed he seemed when Dad explained I was seeing someone. These weren't casual observations anymore. They felt like hints I was supposed to pick up on. The breaking point came 6 weeks ago. I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, helping Mom with the dishes while Dad watched football in the living room. My phone buzzed with a text from my boyfriend, just a silly meme that made me laugh out loud. Mom asked what was so funny, and I showed her the message, still giggling. That's when Dad walked into the kitchen. He saw my phone screen, saw my boyfriend's name, and his whole demeanor changed. The relaxed Sunday afternoon vibe evaporated instantly. He told Mom to go watch TV, waited until she left, then sat down at the kitchen table and folded his hands like he was about to conduct a business meeting. What he said next made my stomach drop to the floor. He explained that his boss had been asking about me, that his son was interested in taking me on a proper date, that this could be really good for our family's future. Then came the part that made me feel like I was living in some historical drama. He said my relationship with my current boyfriend was holding everyone back. I tried to explain that I was happy, that I loved my boyfriend, that I wasn't interested in dating someone else just because his family had money. Dad's face got that red color it turns when he's trying not to lose his temper. He said I was being naive about how the world works, that opportunities like this don't come around often, that I needed to think about what was best for the family, not just what I wanted. I told him I was an adult and could date whoever I chose. That's when he said the words that still echo in my head. If I didn't end things with my boyfriend and give his boss's son a chance, he would cut me out of the family completely. No more Sunday dinners, no more help with anything, no more relationship with him or Mom. And when he dies, I wouldn't see a penny of inheritance. I thought he was bluffing. Dad has always been dramatic when he's upset, and I figured he'd cool down after a few days. I kissed Mom goodbye, told Dad I needed time to think, and left. For 2 weeks I tried calling him. Every call went straight to voicemail. I texted Mom, but she said Dad had forbidden her from talking to me until I came to my senses. I drove to their house twice, but no one answered the door even though I could see both their cars in the driveway. Meanwhile, my boyfriend could tell something was wrong. I'd been distracted, stressed, snapping at him over little things. When he asked what was bothering me, I didn't know how to explain without sounding completely insane. How do you tell someone you love that your father wants you to dump them for a richer guy? It sounds like something out of a bad soap opera. 3 weeks after the kitchen conversation, I broke down and told my boyfriend everything. He was quiet for a long time, then asked if I wanted him to talk to my dad. The thought of that conversation terrified me. My dad can be intimidating when he wants to be, and my boyfriend is this gentle soul who probably hasn't raised his voice in his entire life. But more than that, I realized I was angry. Angry that my dad thought he could control my love life like I was still 16. Angry that he was choosing his job security over my happiness. Angry that Mom was going along with it instead of standing up for me. So I decided to call his bluff. I sent him a text saying I wasn't going to dump my boyfriend, that I was an adult who could make her own decisions, and that if he wanted to cut me out of the family over this, that was his choice to live with. His response came back within minutes. Fine, I was no longer his daughter. That was a month ago, and I haven't heard from either of my parents since. Update 1. This is so much harder than I thought it would be. I've been getting messages asking how I'm doing. And honestly, some days are better than others. The hardest part isn't even the big stuff. It's all the little things I didn't expect to miss. Like, I used to call my mom every Tuesday on my way home from work. Just dumb stuff about our days, complaining about coworkers, her telling me about whatever reality show she's obsessed with this week. Now Tuesdays feel weird and empty. I'll catch myself reaching for my phone out of habit, then remember I'm not supposed to call anymore. Or how my dad would text me articles he found online that he thought I'd find interesting. They were usually completely random. Sometimes about space discoveries, sometimes about new restaurants opening in the city, sometimes just funny animal videos. I never realized how much those little messages meant to me until they stopped coming. My birthday was 2 weeks ago. I've never spent a birthday without at least talking to my parents, even when I was away at college or when we were fighting about stupid stuff. I kept checking my phone all day, thinking maybe they'd call or send a card or something. Nothing. My boyfriend tried to make the day special. He cooked my favorite dinner, bought a chocolate cake from this bakery I love, even hung up balloons in my apartment. But I could barely fake being happy, and I could tell he felt helpless watching me be so sad about something he couldn't fix. The money thing is starting to become a real problem too. I didn't realize how much my parents helped me out until that help disappeared. Not huge amounts, but Dad would slip me cash when my car needed repairs, or Mom would buy groceries when she knew I was tight on money that week. I always told them they didn't need to help, but I guess I got used to that safety net being there. Last week my laptop died completely. Just won't turn on no matter what I try. Normally I would have called Dad, and he would have either helped me figure out how to fix it or helped me buy a new one. Instead, I'm writing this update on my phone because I can't afford to replace it right now. But the worst part is how this is affecting my relationship. My boyfriend keeps asking if I'm okay, if there's anything he can do, if maybe he should reach out to my parents himself. I know he feels guilty, like this is somehow his fault, which makes me feel even worse. He shouldn't have to feel bad about being the person I love. We had our first real fight about it 3 days ago. He said maybe I should consider meeting the boss's son, just to see if that would fix things with my family. Not actually dating him, just meeting him to show my dad I was willing to compromise. I completely lost it. I yelled at him for even suggesting I should pretend to be interested in someone else just to make my father happy. He tried to explain that he wasn't asking me to actually do anything, just that maybe there was a middle ground somewhere. But that's the thing, there is no middle ground here. Either I dump the person I love to make my dad's work life easier, or I don't have parents anymore. There's no compromise that fixes this situation. We made up the next day, but I can tell this whole thing is wearing on him too. He started being extra careful about what he says around me, like he's walking on eggshells. That's not fair to him, and it's not the relationship either of us wants to have. I did something kind of crazy yesterday. I drove by my parents' house, not to stop or anything, just to see it. Mom was in the front yard planting flowers in her garden. She looked smaller than I remembered and older somehow. I parked down the street and watched her for a few minutes, hoping maybe she'd look up and see me, that we could have some kind of moment that would break through all this stubbornness. But she never looked up, and eventually I drove away feeling worse than before. Some of you have been asking if I've tried reaching out through other family members. The truth is, we don't have much extended family, and what little we have lives far away. My mom has a sister in another state, but they only talk a few times a year. Dad's parents died when I was little. I have a few cousins I see at weddings and funerals, but we're not close enough for me to involve them in something like this. I keep wondering if I'm being too stubborn. If maybe I should just meet this guy once to show my dad I tried. But every time I think about it, I get angry all over again. Why should I have to pretend to be interested in someone I don't want to date? Why should my father get to decide who I love based on what's convenient for his career? My boyfriend deserves better than this. He deserves someone whose family welcomes him, who doesn't come with all this drama and stress. Sometimes I wonder if he'd be happier with someone else, someone whose parents would actually want to meet him instead of pretending he doesn't exist. But then he'll do something sweet, like leaving little notes in my bag before work, or showing up with coffee when I'm having a rough day, and I remember why I fell in love with him in the first place. He makes me laugh when I want to cry. He listens to me complain about the same thing for the 100th time without getting irritated. He holds my hand when we're walking down the street like he's proud to be with me. I just wish loving him didn't have to cost me everything else. Update 2. I can't believe I'm writing this, but everything has completely changed. 2 weeks ago, something happened that I never could have predicted. I was at the grocery store trying to decide if I could afford the name brand pasta sauce, or if I needed to stick with the generic stuff, when I heard someone call my name. It was my mom. She looked terrible. I don't mean that in a cruel way, but she looked like she hadn't been sleeping well, and she'd lost weight in a way that made her clothes hang loose on her frame. We stared at each other for what felt like forever before she started crying right there in the pasta aisle. She told me she missed me so much it physically hurt, that she'd been driving by places we used to go together just hoping she might see me, that she'd started calling my number just to hear my voicemail because she missed my voice. Then she said something that broke my heart. Dad had forbidden her from contacting me, but she couldn't stand it anymore. We ended up sitting in her car in the parking lot for 2 hours, both of us crying and talking over each other. She told me that things at home were miserable. Dad was angry all the time, snapping at her over little things, barely eating dinner. He'd thrown himself into work even more than usual, staying late every night and working weekends. But the biggest shock was what she told me about his job situation. Apparently, Dad's boss had been asking him regularly about me and his son. When would I be ready to meet him? Had I broken up with my boyfriend yet? The boss had started making comments about how disappointing it was that I wasn't interested, and how he'd expected more from Dad's family. Mom said Dad was terrified he was going to lose his job over this. That all his talk about cutting me off was really just panic about losing everything he'd worked for. She said he'd been waking up in the middle of the night, stressed about money and wondering if he should start looking for another job at his age. I felt this weird mix of anger and sympathy. Part of me wanted to say that was his own fault for making promises he couldn't keep. But another part of me understood that desperation, that fear of losing stability you've worked years to build. Mom begged me to just meet the boss's son once. Not to date him, not to lead him on, just to have coffee so Dad could tell his boss that I'd given it a try. She promised that after that, they'd accept whatever I decided and welcome my boyfriend into the family. I told her I needed time to think about it, but honestly, seeing her so broken down made me want to find some kind of solution that didn't involve anyone being miserable. That night, I talked to my boyfriend about everything Mom had said. I expected him to be upset about the idea of me meeting someone else even just for coffee. Instead, he surprised me by saying he thought I should do it. He said he could see how much losing my family was hurting me, and if having one awkward coffee meeting could fix things, it seemed worth it. He trusted me completely, and he knew I wasn't going to suddenly fall for some guy just because he had money. So I called Mom back and agreed to meet the boss's son for coffee. One meeting just to say I tried. The meeting was exactly as awkward as I expected. The guy was nice enough, but we had absolutely nothing in common. He talked about his gym routine and his investment portfolios while I tried to steer the conversation toward books or movies or anything that might reveal an actual personality. After an hour of painful small talk, I thanked him for the coffee and made it clear that while he seemed like a decent person, I wasn't interested in pursuing anything romantic. He actually seemed relieved. Turns out his dad had been pressuring him too, and he'd been dreading the whole thing as much as I had. We both agreed to tell our parents we'd given it an honest try but weren't compatible. I thought that would be the end of it. I'd held up my part of the bargain. Now my parents would accept my relationship and everything would go back to normal. But that's not what happened. 3 days after the coffee meeting, Mom called me crying again. Dad's boss wasn't satisfied with one meeting. He wanted to know why his son and I weren't planning a second date. He'd started making more pointed comments at work about Dad's family not being as cooperative as he'd hoped. That's when I realized this was never going to end. Even if I went on a few dates to buy Dad some time, what then? Would I have to fake a relationship for months? Years? Would I have to break up with my boyfriend and actually marry this guy just to protect Dad's job? I was furious. I called Dad directly for the first time in months and surprisingly he answered. The conversation started with both of us yelling, but somewhere in the middle something shifted. Dad finally admitted he was scared. Scared of losing his job, scared of not being able to provide for Mom, scared of starting over at his age. He said he'd gotten so caught up in trying to solve his work problem that he'd lost sight of what he was asking me to sacrifice. Then he said something I'll never forget. He told me he was proud of me for refusing to give up the person I loved, even when it cost me everything. He said he'd raised me to be strong and independent, and he shouldn't be surprised that I wouldn't let anyone control my life decisions, even him. We both cried on that phone call. I told him how much I'd missed him and Mom, how hard it had been to feel like I didn't have a family anymore. He apologized for putting his job stress above my happiness, and for asking Mom to choose between supporting him and maintaining a relationship with me. But here's the thing that really shocked me. Dad had already been looking for a new job. He said he'd realized that working for someone who would try to manipulate his family wasn't worth any amount of money or security. He'd been interviewing with other companies for the past month, and he'd gotten an offer from a place that actually paid slightly better. He was planning to give his notice the following week. When I asked why he hadn't told me sooner, he said he wanted to make sure the new job was definitely happening before he got my hopes up. He also admitted he'd been too proud to admit that he'd made such a huge mistake in how he'd handled everything. Last Sunday, I went to my parents' house for dinner for the first time in 3 months. Mom cooked all my favorite foods and kept hugging me randomly throughout the evening. Dad seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, even though he was technically unemployed now. But the best part was that they asked me to bring my boyfriend next time. He was nervous about meeting them, especially given everything that had happened, but I told him they were going to love him. And I was right. Mom immediately started showing him photo albums from when I was little, and Dad actually engaged him in a real conversation about teaching and education. By the end of the evening, Dad was giving him advice about dealing with difficult administrators, and Mom was packing him leftovers to take home. Dad starts his new job next week. He seems excited about it in a way he never was about his old job. He said his new boss interviewed him for over an hour and never once asked about his family situation or whether he had any single daughters. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up for what matters to you. For months I thought I had to choose between my family and my happiness, but it turned out that by refusing to compromise on something that was fundamentally wrong, I forced everyone to find a better solution. My boyfriend and I are stronger than ever. Going through something this difficult together showed us both that we can handle whatever challenges come our way. He supported me even when it meant dealing with my family drama, and I learned that love is worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible to win. I know not everyone's story would end this way. I got lucky that Dad was able to find another job, and that his boss's demands were unreasonable enough that even Dad eventually realized how wrong the situation was. But I'm glad I stuck to my principles, even when it felt like it was costing me everything. Sometimes the people who love you need to see you stand firm before they realize they're asking too much. And sometimes walking away from something that seems secure is the only way to find something better. My parents and my boyfriend are planning to go to a baseball game together next weekend. Dad's idea. 6 months ago, I never would have imagined that was possible, but here we are. Family dinners are loud and chaotic again. Exactly the way they should be. I guess what I'm trying to say is that love really is worth fighting for, even when the fight feels lonely and impossible. especially then.